Pelasan silanganan, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang inilang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manduluti, di ka pasisiil. Sa dagat ang bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong buhaw, may dalagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagtiniling. Ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidinig. Lupa ng araw ng walhati kong sinta, buhay langit sa pinto. Aming ligaya na pag may mga atin na pumatay ng tanin sa'yo.
When everyone is watching and judging your every move, the pressure feels so real. Is this the right way? But when you know yourself and love what you do, nothing can stop you. It's your life. Do your thing. Find your way. I'm finding mine with BDO.
Today, more than ever, technology has become an integral part of our daily lives. For BPI, it has allowed us to reach out to more Filipinos across the country and the world. It has given us the opportunity to nurture relationships, provide much-needed assistance, and make lives easier and more convenient for our customers, the community, and the country during the best and worst of times. BPI gives more than just control over finances. Our products and services give confidence, security, and peace of mind. Through innovation that transforms the way we work and inspires a better tomorrow for all, so that no matter where you are or whatever it is you need, BPI has the right solution for your banking needs. As we continue to look to the future, we see stronger bonds, enduring relationships, and lasting partnerships that further strengthen our commitment to build a better nation. BPI. Ready today, ready tomorrow.
Every day, when you log into BPI, you're connected to people in so many different ways. Because now it's not just about the money. You transfer joy to family, friends, and even strangers. You exchange gratitude, explore your passions with people who matter. share your load, or for moments worth saving. You fund your journey and go anywhere your life takes you. You go on to invest in yourself. Log into happiness, to drive, to barkada, to family, to life. Log in to BPI's next generation of digital banking.
Next generation.
Hi, I'm your digital banking assistant. How can I help you?
I see you happy. I see you proud and assured. I see you braving it out. I see you chasing your dreams. See yourself through with Critical Care 100. Enjoy a lifetime of protection from up to 100 critical illnesses with optional riders to help you go further.
SM, through the example of its founder, Henry C. Sr., recognizes that business growth and social development go hand in hand. SM focuses its social development initiatives and integrates its philanthropic thrusts with an eye towards United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, focusing on the following areas: education, medical assistance, community relief operations, sustainable agriculture, micro, small, medium enterprise promotion, social inclusion, disaster resilience, environmental responsibility. SM Foundation's Kabalikat sa Kabuhayan, or KSK, aims to empower farmers and community beneficiaries to enable them to learn modern farming techniques and help them become self-sufficient. In a multi-sectoral partnership, KSK has trained over 26,000 farmers through nearly 200 farmers' training sessions conducted in close to 3,000 barangays and over 800 municipalities and cities in the Philippines. The program provides a holistic curriculum approach, identifying target beneficiary groups and promoting social inclusion, particularly among women and senior citizens. Engaging trainees in a 12-week-long hands-on training on modern yet practical farming technologies to improve the quality and quantity of their crops. Providing participants with financial literacy and business plan sessions. Promoting values formation and capacity building through workshops. And establishing linkages to local community markets and exposure to SM markets. KSK brings hope in farming, providing food security and a source of income among farmers and its community beneficiaries. SM's social development programs aim to bring about meaningful change to the people and the communities served every day.
We are Entrego. We bring your product from you to there, whenever and wherever. With business and e-commerce growing fast, we at Entrego promise to bridge the digital divide. We always deliver. We are committed to provide fast, on time, safe, and reliable logistics services for our customers. We never stop. We are enabled by the latest technology that provides full operational visibility. Our fleet is equipped with GPS mobile devices. We move forward. We are everywhere. We are committed to expanding our network through widespread distribution centers across the Philippines. We promise to take your products from you to there, wherever there is. We are ready to deliver.
BSP Governor Dr. Benjamin Jokno, Messrs. Eduardo Francisco, Paulo Azola, Emilio Neri, my colleagues at the Manila Times, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the Manila Times, welcome to today's forum, Road to Recovery, Turning Crisis into Opportunities. Our last business forum focused on the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. It is only fitting today that we turn our attention to recovery and to finding the opportunities amid the crisis that we are all facing. Of course, in looking ahead, we should not lose sight of the situation in front of us. The economic landscape is still shifting precisely because the health threat remains. Here and in other places, the number of coronavirus cases and deaths are still increasing. We expect that many of our viewers today look forward to an updated assessment of the economy. Also, not a few would probably like to ask whether a rapid or V-shaped recovery remains a possibility for the Philippines, or as we have suggested in an earlier editorial, that we should factor in the lingering presence of COVID-19 and redraft the economic outlook along with the country's medium and long-term economic plan. While our tone may sound bleak, we find consolation in believing that there are almost always a silver lining, so to speak. Would it be appropriate to heed the idea of Baron Rothschild, the 18th century British nobleman and member of the famous banking clan, who said that the time to buy is when there's blood in the streets? Perhaps our speakers today could react to this. We ourselves may not have the answers, but like in our other events, we have invited the experts to weigh in on the relevant questions of the day. The Times organizes these fora so that our readers and followers on our website, digital edition, and social media platforms may hear directly from the people supremely qualified to offer their insight, add context to complex issues, and give recommendations that are helpful to planning and other policy work. I would like to conclude here so that we may get on to our speakers today. But before I do, I would like to express my gratitude to all our speakers and reactor, particularly Governor Jokno. Thank you, sir, for sharing your valuable time, as I am sure the present crisis is keeping you and your team occupied. I hope that we are able to deliver our part, which is to convey your message to the Filipino people and others around the world watching this forum. Let me say also our appreciation to those watching, and that if they may want to ask questions, they may do so by typing them in the comment section of whatever social media platform they are using to watch this. If we do not get to some of those questions, as I'm sure we'll be receiving plenty, we shall forward them later to the appropriate speaker or speakers. Finally, allow me to acknowledge all those who helped make this event possible. Thank you to our co-sponsors, BDO, BPI, BPI Philam, San Miguel Corporation, our sponsors, SM Investment Corporation, special partners, the Cagayan Economic Zone Authority, Entrego, Maybank, Paymaya, and last but not least, our media partner, the Manila Times TV. Again, welcome, and let us now move on to our keynote speaker.
Prior to his appointment as Governor of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Dr. Benjamin Jokno was called to serve as Budget Secretary by President Rodrigo Duterte from 2016 to 2019. He was also the Budget Secretary from 1998 to 2001 under the Estrada administration and Budget Undersecretary from 1986 to 1991 under Corazon Aquino's administration. He finished his bachelor's degree in public administration from the University of the Philippines in 1968 and earned his master's degrees in public administration in 1970 and in economics in 1974 from the same university. He holds a Master of Arts in Political Economy from the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, and a Doctor of Philosophy in Economics from the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs, Syracuse University in Syracuse, New York. His policy expertise and research contribution extend to various areas of public economics, such as structure and scope of government, tax policies and reforms, public expenditure management analysis, fiscal decentralization, national budget, and public debt. He is a professor emeritus of the University of the Philippines, Diliman, teaching public sector economics, microeconomics, macroeconomics, and development economics, among others, for over 40 years. He was also chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Pamantasan ng Lungsod na Maynila. He served as fiscal advisor to the Philippine Senate and chairman and chief executive officer of the Philippine National Oil Company and chairman of the Local Water Utilities Administration. Besides his stints as advisor and consultant to various multilateral agencies such as the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the European Commission, and the United States Agency for International Development for work in a number of Asian countries, including the Philippines and China, Dr. Jokno has also authored several publications and discussion papers regarding his research interests that have been published in academic journals and policy reports. Among his notable policy reform contributions include the 1986 tax reform program, which simplified the income tax system and introduced the value-added tax, the What You See is What You Get policy, which streamlined the release of funds, and the Government Procurement Reform Act, which brought modernization, regulation, and standardization of government procurement activities.
Right. Manila Times President and CEO Dante Klink Ang, Chief Operating Officer Blanca Mercado, other Manila Times officers and staff, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and thank you for inviting me to this Manila Times online forum. I adopted your theme, Road to Recovery, Turning Crisis into Opportunities, as the title of my presentation today. We are 3.5 months into the lockdown. Cautiously, but surely, we are getting back on our feet. Even as the COVID-19 uncertainty continues, I am optimistic that we can overcome this crisis. Let me share BSP's views on growth and recovery after this pandemic. This is a snapshot of the terrain after the outbreak of COVID-19. The domestic financial markets were racked by heightened volatility following the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw a sharp decline in portfolio inflows in the first 2 months of 2020. On March 19, the stock market hit its lowest year-to-date index since October 11, 2011. We have had serious exogenous shocks in the first quarter: the Taal volcano eruption, US-China trade tensions, African swine fever. But nothing comes close to the COVID-19 pandemic that has brought the global economy to a halt. The confluence of these shocks resulted in the contraction of the economy by 0.2% in the first quarter of 2020. This is the first negative real GDP growth since 1998. That was 20 years ago, when the economy wrestled with the El Nino and the Asian financial crisis. This year, the Development Budget Coordination Committee forecasts that the economy will contract between -2 to -3.4%. On a positive note, the peso appears to buck the trend, as most regional currencies have depreciated significantly against the US dollar. The peso, by contrast, has appreciated. The Philippines has a hefty gross international reserves, estimated at $93.3 billion in May, and we forecast that the year-end GIR will exceed $95 billion. Despite the bleak global picture, there is reason to be optimistic about the future of the Philippine economy. The long reform agenda that the government has consistently pursued across administrations has allowed the country to achieve a more broad-based growth. The volatility of real GDP and inflation considerably declined over time. Aggregate demand in the post-global financial crisis period expanded at an average rate of 6.4% annually, comparable to the growth rates of China and India. We have a hefty foreign exchange reserves, low public sector debt, manageable external payments position, and a solid credit profile. The country's external debt to GDP ratio is only 21.4% as of end March 2020, down from about 60% in 2005. Philippine banks are well capitalized. Their liquidity positions are strong, and non-performing loans are low. Proof of the effectiveness of progressive banking regulatory reforms that we have implemented over the years. In a recent survey released just this May by The Economist, among 66 emerging economies, the Philippines is ranked the sixth most robust on the basis of four measures of financial strength, namely public debt, foreign debt, cost of borrowing, and reserve cover. When the coronavirus crisis broke out in the country, the government had and continues to have adequate fiscal and monetary policy space, which it immediately deployed to calm down the market and ease liquidity pressures. Last Thursday, the Monetary Board cut the policy interest rate by 50 basis points. For its part, the BSP promptly implemented measures to ease liquidity and sustain the flow of credit that have calmed down market jitters. Recognizing the importance of MSMEs in the economy, the BSP allowed banks to include new MSME loans as part of their compliance with the required reserve ratio. The credit risk weight of MSME loans that are current in status was temporarily reduced, while MSME loans with government guarantee were assigned zero weight. These policy measures are aimed at encouraging more lending to MSMEs. But our optimism is also tempered by a sense of realism that there are still much work to be done. We have a good head start with the economic and regulatory buffers we built over the years. But this can be easily eroded given the huge resource requirement of the crisis response measures. As we reopen the economy, we remain vigilant because the risk of COVID-19 remains high. We continue to maintain a disciplined approach to policy, coordination, and decision-making. The crisis has exposed the vulnerabilities and gaps in existing processes and systems that we need to swiftly deal with to recover lost momentum because of this pandemic. So let me expound on four critical structural imperatives that I believe are opportunities for growth that we should seize. First is the modernization of the country's health system to ensure efficient public health infrastructure and resilient crisis preparedness framework. This would require giving incentives for the use of science and technology in health policy decision-making. It would require overhauling of the healthcare supply chain management. The government must also initiate the formulation of a national preparedness and response framework for disease outbreaks and pandemics, taking into account coordination gaps across different levels of government. Second is the need to upgrade the information and communication technology, infrastructure system, and processes. Technology will play a pivotal role in reshaping the means of production and the delivery of goods and services in the post-COVID world. Digital technology will also be critical in enabling simpler and more efficient transactions with government agencies. Business transactions such as online retail, online banking, online medical consultations, and digital payments will become a necessity. All this need to be supported by a safe and reliable digital infrastructure system with robust and dependable cybersecurity protection. Third is the modernization of Philippine agriculture and the government's supply chain management system with the aid of digital technologies. This will help ensure that food and other essential goods and services are available, accessible, and affordable. Fourth is the development of a highly skilled and resilient workforce by strengthening the educational system, sustained upskilling, and adequate health protection to future-proof our workforce. In this way, the country's productive capacity can benefit more strongly from its favorable demographics. The structural reform imperatives I have outlined are outside the ambit of BSP, yet they have profound impact on the realization of the BSP's policy thrust. Against this backdrop, what else can the BSP do? The BSP's policy space remains sufficient. The BSP has yet to exhaust the conventional monetary instruments in its toolkit to support the liquidity requirements of the economy, should conditions warrant. Given the possibility of higher defaults and non-performing loans, there may be scope to offer more debt restructuring measures. We agree in principle with the goal of the proposed Philippine Economic Stimulus Act of 2020. The Act seeks to ease the plight of workers, families, and businesses who were adversely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. It also aims to facilitate recovery and preserve the country's economic growth. As in any measure providing support using public funds, prudence has to be observed to rein in excessive moral hazards that may arise. Human behavior is expected to change with physical distancing as the new norm. People are expected to prefer using electronic payment and financial services to face-to-face and over-the-counter transactions. To expand the reach of digital transactions, we need to increase contactless payment facilities, such as PayMaya and GCash. Their use can be expanded to include wet markets, retail stores, and public utility vehicles, jeepneys, taxis, tricycle, buses, MRTs. We need to quicken the adoption of the National QR Code Standard, or QRPH, to enable interoperable payments for person-to-person and person-to-merchant transactions. The scale of the recently launched eGovPay facility can be expanded to enable ordinary citizens to digitally pay government taxes, fees, and charges. The speedy implementation of the national ID system will enable inclusive and innovative digital finance and ensure reliable database for the design and impact assessment of policies, including those for taxation and social support purposes. With the increased usage of non-bank channels to send and receive money, the BSP has been improving channels of remittances with the approval of new technologies in remittance transfers, mobile phones, internet, and cash cards. There are challenges to the implementation of financial digital services, such as insufficient IT infrastructure, leading to the slow internet connection, data privacy, and cybersecurity risks, and lack of knowledge on new technologies. Promoting financial literacy and ensuring good market conduct are likewise important to deepen the public's trust in digital financial services. Moving forward, more measures should be taken to reduce external vulnerabilities. Congress, meanwhile, must provide additional measures to reduce the cost of doing business in the Philippines. It must also streamline the investment process and increase business confidence by improving the business climate, fostering competition, and boosting productivity growth via the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises Act, or CREATE, and amendments to the Public Services Act. Former US President John F. Kennedy once said, and I quote, "The Chinese use two brushstrokes to write the word crisis. One brushstroke stands for danger, the other for opportunity. In a crisis, be aware of the danger, but recognize the opportunity." The COVID-19 crisis is so unprecedented that we shouldn't let it go to waste. There are important lessons for government moving forward. This once-in-a-lifetime health crisis emphasizes the importance of building sufficient buffers during good times. It likewise highlights the need to quicken the modernization of the country's ICT infrastructure and policies. The list of reform possibilities is longer than what I have offered. There are deep learnings that we should collectively heed if we are to rise above the crisis and forge ahead toward the goal of a stronger, fairer, and more inclusive society. Thank you and good day.
Thank you, Governor. And I think we'll have the reaction now for Mr. Neri. But first, an introduction of our reactor.
Bank of the Philippine Islands lead economist Emilio Neri Jr. was voted as the #1 best equities economist and #2 fixed income economist by the Fund Managers Association of the Philippines in 2019. He was also ranked #1 among the local economists by the Department of Finance as having the most accurate gross domestic product growth projections from 2016 to 2018. The research team he heads consistently ranks at the top of survey for analysts conducted by Bloomberg, Asia Money, and The Asset. Prior to his stint in BPI, he served as economics and banking sector analyst for a former Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas Monetary Board member. He is currently the president of the Philippine Economic Society and was a consultant at the Asian Development Bank and senior economics researcher and lecturer on monetary and fiscal economics at the University of Asia and the Pacific.
Welcome, Mr. Neri.
Good afternoon to everyone. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you fine, sir. Thank you.
Okay, first let me thank you, Sir Dante Ang, and the rest of Manila Times for inviting me in today's forum to react to the Governor's presentation. Governor, thank you for giving me also the opportunity to react to your slides and to your presentation. Let me share very quickly my screen, if you don't mind. Can you see it? Okay.
We can see it.
Okay, thank you. So again, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to join this forum today. I'd like to cover 3 areas in my reaction to the Governor. First, maybe highlight some of the bright spots for the Philippines, aside from those that the Governor have already shown. I'll also talk a little bit about the need to balance policies. And then finally, take a look at why this pandemic may be telling us to somehow take a different perspective in order to refocus or reprioritize our economic goals. First, the banking industry welcomes the forceful and timely response of our monetary authorities to cushion the impact of the pandemic and the hard lockdown in our economy. The BSP has cut by 175 basis points since the start of the year, which is the second strongest response in Southeast Asia after Singapore's slightly more aggressive rate cut. We support all the initiatives introduced by the BSP since March, both in the areas of monetary policy and banking regulatory initiatives. In fact, because of these policies, the Philippines continues to enjoy an abundance of domestic liquidity and a low interest rate environment, unlike the previous crisis of 2008, 1998, and during the 1980s. Another bright spot for the Philippines is it is closely linked with the ASEAN, which in turn is closely linked with China's merchandise trade. As you can see in the slide to the left, which is PMI across major economies, China's manufacturing recovery is way ahead of these other developed economies by at least 3 months. Whereas everybody else is still in contraction, of course by less in May than in April, China is already in expansion mode as far as manufacturing is concerned. Now, if you look at the right side of my slide, you will see that the ASEAN has actually become China's largest trading partner since early 2020. We overtook the European Union. This means that the ASEAN manufacturing sector has a big likelihood of being able to recover early due to its strong linkages with the value chains in the region. That, of course, includes the Philippine economy. More recently, we have some leading indicators in manufacturing, and while we continue to see declines or expectations of declines in manufacturing, the degree by which it is declining has gone down. With the exception of Indonesia, which is still floundering with a 28.6 reading as shown by this chart. The third bright spot, of course, is again, as we get closer to the vaccine, Filipino consumers are likely to see significant spending recovery ahead of everybody else, as long as jobs can be revived and incomes can slowly return to normal. So let me just very quickly summarize those 3 bright spots. The low interest rate environment, together with abundance of liquidity in a time of crisis, is actually very timely and forceful enough on the monetary side. Second, we can capitalize on our trade and other linkages with the ASEAN and China. So that PMI is, because it's contracting less in our region, will be an advantage in the near to medium term. And then finally, the Philippines has probably the strongest potential for a consumption rebound. So, well, as an independent analyst, I'd like to comment on the possible side effects of having very low interest rates. While low interest rates are generally considered supportive of the economy, excessive risk-taking can be one of its biggest side effects. With global and regional central banks cutting interest rates to record lows, including the expansion of their balance sheets at unprecedented levels, interest rates may no longer reflect the true risk premium of assets. Speculative activities tend to be excessively rewarded in a very low interest rate environment. The local stock and property markets may be good examples of this. For stocks, the massive decline in the guidance of listed Philippine stock, listed companies in the stock market continue to rally, and they soar close to record high PEs, despite announcements of 50, 60, 90% decline in incomes. Asset inflation in the property market also seems a little bit pronounced. I mean, this chart I'm showing you now compares consumer price inflation versus condominium price inflation. And it's very clear that there's a big difference. We are, of course, aware of the consequences of soaring property prices on wealth and income distribution if the landed class gets most of the benefits of the favorable interest rate environment. There is the risk that this can actually aggravate, and we've seen it in the United States, rising social tensions between the haves and the have-nots. Well, the other point I want to consider for this audience is that this crisis may be an opportunity to repurpose or re-strategize or reprioritize our economic goals. One of the things that we may need to reconsider is giving priority to get an A rating from Moody's, S&P, and Fitch, more so if it leads to a sort of mindset that makes the rating the goal rather than a means to achieve more important objectives. Our understanding is that credit rating agencies have a neutral view about hunger, poverty, inequality, disaster preparedness, nor how well sovereigns invest in human capital. Credit rating agencies grade sovereigns on their capacity to pay their creditors more than anything else. So again, what this chart shows is that historically, the low interest rates that we enjoyed in 2013 compared to, well, low interest rates also today did not have to come with a very high rating. So in 2013, for example, our credit rating was BBB minus. And yet we saw the 10-year yield hit an all-time high during that period. Of course, now I think the market is also starting to reach these levels, but it sort of demonstrates that the credit ratings are good and they are a plus to our economy, but they may not necessarily be sufficient to be able to meet our economic goals. Well, we agree with the governor on the need to push through with the structural reforms that he just enumerated. We agree that we need to support the initiatives of the legislature to raise revenues, as well as to ensure that our health system, ICT infra, become more prepared for the new economy. We are glad that the good governor is also supportive of the need to strengthen counter-cyclical policies for a near-term fiscal response that will stabilize the performance of the economy. More importantly, to allocate a budget to save lives and livelihoods, including the Arise bill in Congress, originally called PESA. While we understand, however, that the executive branch is trying to be conservative in order to preserve our ammunition in case a new wave or a resurgence of infections will require more resources, and number two, the drop in revenues in 2020 was so substantial, or probably will continue to be substantial because of the poor economic performance compared to prior crisis episodes. So this, we should give them some slack on why they need to be conservative. But there is also an argument saying that if the fiscal response is not forceful enough, it could risk the economy sliding into an unmanageable downward spiral, or what some people would refer to as a doom loop. We all know that the activities of the economy, namely employment, income, production, and spending, are all highly interdependent. And that if we fail to stabilize the downturn, could lead to a protracted recession. The need for more forceful fiscal response may be evident in some leading indicators that could threaten to slow the Philippine economy's recovery. First, the decline in imports in the Philippines was massive and may be a leading indication of our entering this doom loop. It is possible that we are actually mixing up this stability and resilience of the peso against major currencies as a sign of confidence, when it is very possible that the massive collapse in demand is what is keeping our current account balance of payments in surplus, and that the peso's outperformance of the regional currencies may be due more to poor rather than positive prospects. Another indicator that makes a forceful fiscal response more compelling is the surge of our unemployment rate to all-time highs. Again, it is controversial whether they were able to do the surveys as well as they did in the PSA. But so far, other than the Philippines, only Malaysia has reported the second quarter unemployment number. Ours is clearly much higher than Malaysia's. And we're hoping that as the others report, that we will not be too far from each other. I have run out of time, I believe, so I will end my reaction here. So again, let me thank take this opportunity to thank Manila Times, Mr. Dante Ang, and Governor Jokno for giving me a chance to react to his presentation. Thank you very much and good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Neri. Thank you again, Governor Jokno. I just want to mention again that for those who are watching, you may send in your questions by typing them in the comment section of whatever social media platform you are using to watch this forum today. And I guess while we are waiting for those questions to be formulated, may we take this moderator's prerogative to ask the first few. My co-moderator, Ben, I think has some questions to ask. Go ahead, Ben.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm going to direct this to both Governor Jokno and Mr. Neri. In your reaction, you took note of the big drop in imports and how that's a demand killer, and that's a question that's come to my mind a couple of times. How do you kickstart the demand? Because looking at it from like the BSP's perspective, there's a lot you can do to encourage more lending and to keep liquidity in the financial system. But how do you get people to actually spend the money? What can you do to encourage the demand? And the one tool that has been mentioned several times is the PESA Act. But then on the other hand, we have the Department of Finance that has come out and said that, well, while the whole concept is good, the one that they're pressing right now is too expensive. So how do we kickstart the consumer end of the economy, because that seems to be where the biggest problem lies.
All right. First of all, the reason why we have cut the policy rate by another 50 basis points is because exactly we want people to spend. We want consumers to spend. If they have, for example, a home improvement project in mind, they can spend now. You haven't seen this kind of interest rate before. If you're a businessman and if you have a bright idea, go to the bank, you can borrow at a very low cost at the moment. And it's going to be for a long time. This low interest rate will be around for a long time. And on the part of the government, it's easier now to finance the deficit. It's cheaper to borrow money on their part. So we're doing all this, but as you said, we cannot force them to spend if they don't want to spend. But that's the reason why we are reducing the interest rate, policy interest rate.
Mr. Neri, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, well, I think two things are very important. Aside, of course, from it is true that consumers will be encouraged by the low interest rate environment, as the governor said. But for the fiscal side, I think, and they are already starting to work on it, what we need to do is make the people have the confidence to slowly go out. No? And to be able to do this, we need to address health concerns, particularly the T3. Yeah. The government is already working on it, and we're very encouraged by the development so far. We need, however, to work on the data a little bit more so that it will be more reliable, so that we can do the T3s, no? Those three elements of T3. The other is transportation. Well, we are going to begin opening up transportation, but we will probably be far from even 75% objective at this point. If it's not very clear, and if the consumers are not confident enough that the available public transportation system that will be available as we move out of GCQ to MGCQ and to less lockdowns will ensure that they will stay healthy. Those two elements are very crucial to to boost the confidence of consumers to go back, aside from the low interest rate environment. Without those complementing elements, the monetary easing and the availability of liquidity can only go so far.
Thank you, Governor. Just continuing on that consumer confidence, does it worry the BSP a little bit that the peso is performing strongly against the dollar, because that is as we understand it, a major driver of consumption in the Philippines. But I mean, even today, I think it's trading below 50 pesos to a dollar. But does that worry you that maybe there is an argument that the peso may be too strong at this point to stimulate the consumption that we need?
Maybe it's too strong for those with preference for imported goods, right? So at this time, I think you don't need those expensive Gucci or Ferragamo products at this time, right? So I don't, we're not intervening in the market. We just participate to even the financial transaction, make sure that there are no violent fluctuations going on, right? So, but that's how it is. The peso is strong because, first of all, I said we have a hefty gross international reserves, and there's strong confidence by international agencies, international rating agencies. For example, we just got an upgrade from the Japan rating agency in a sea of downgrades. There are massive downgrades all over, but yet they upgrade us from BBB+ to A-. That's confidence. And so I don't apologize for the strength of the peso, but in fact, it's the strongest currency right now in this part of the world.
Sir, I should mention that when we started promoting this event, there were some, I suppose, critics or skeptics who were calling us out on focusing on recovery when they see the crisis continuing. And just watching the news today, for instance, we see how there may be a new surge of coronavirus cases in the U.S., even the possibility of some U.S. states shutting down some businesses again. China is seeing some new cases, and they've deployed a number of contact tracers now. I mean, I guess the point is that there is no end in sight yet for this health crisis. And is it premature to start talking about recovery when the situation is still very fluid and unfolding?
Well, the V-shaped recovery is a fantasy, okay? But I've always been saying that we can have a U-shaped recovery, and that is possible. In fact, the S&P just said that the Philippine economy will contract by 3% this year, and that's within our target contraction percent. But they're forecasting a strong recovery next year, 9.5%. That goes to show that there's a lot of confidence in the Philippine economy, and I'm one of the reasons why we had a 50% cut in the interest rate is because of the IMF report that just came out last week, that this crisis can be protracted and deeper. And so that's the global economy. We can take care of ourselves here. I think we're doing well in the on the health side, as long as our citizens do their patriotic duty by doing what they're supposed to do, which is wear a mask or do the hygiene, right? So we can manage, actually. If you look at the death incidence here in the Philippines, compared to the total population, I think that's the right metric. Death versus the population. We're doing well. So I'm not scared of a so-called second, third surge. I think should that happen, we can just laser focus on the barangay or the sitio where that is happening. We don't have to have a nationwide
total.
Right? I don't think we're going to have that kind of lockdown ever. Okay.
Sir, the last time you appeared as a guest at our event, You said the Philippines was well insulated against external events. Well, I don't mean to put you in a hot spot, but it seems like no country was prepared for what is happening. But I guess my question is, how much more shock can our system take, given that there is no vaccine forthcoming, probably until next year. There are some developments on the treatment, but that is yet really to come around and become available. How much more can we take? I guess that's the question.
I don't think we'll ever experience the lockdown we just went through.
Okay.
Why? Because at that time there's insufficient health facilities that can take care of the victims, right? Right now we're ready. We have enough health facilities and we have enough test facility equipment. So we just do it more carefully, and we just, as I said, behave like good citizens, right? So there are some areas where it might not take a long time. For example, we're not going to open bars soon enough, right?
Right.
Maybe the schools can be open, gradually. But the big concerts, the big convention events, the ball games, etc., we can postpone that in the absence of a vaccine. But we're doing fine, as I said. So I'll just be careful, but let's start opening the economy now. I think, for example, MRT, I keep watching it. It's running more efficiently now. It's on time. Okay, I observe that. So why only 30%? Why not make it 50% or even 100%? As long as we observe the health program, right? As in, that's how they do it in Japan. That's how they do it in New York and other places, right?
Ben?
Yeah, I have one burning question, and I think it's probably something that a lot of people are interested in. You made a big point about ICT infrastructure, and even before we can think about recovery, it's become so important because everybody is trying to do their job online, do their business online. I know the BSP has put a lot of effort into digital payment systems and things, most of which work really good. But the ICT infrastructure seems to be a huge obstacle for this country, and it's really become critical now with the way our economy and our way of living and doing business has changed. What would be, from your perspective, what would be your recommendation to get that moving, to get that investment happening, and start to see some real improvements? I mean, how long has the country been waiting, for that to get better?
Yeah, I understand that the major constraint here is the broadband capacity, and that will be solved soon. I think Facebook has an infrastructure that will cut across Luzon, and they will quadruple the broadband width in the country. Now it's up to the bureaucracy, the Department of the ICT to work double time, triple time to keep us to the level we want to be. As you know, my goal at the BSP is that by the end of my term, 50% of all financial transactions should be digital in volume and in value. And that I said that even before the pandemic. I think we're going to accomplish that sooner than 2023 because of what happened.
Because we'll have to.
Because we have to, yes.
Governor, there's a question here from one of our viewers, from Edith De Chao, but I think Mr. Neri should chime in on this as well. And the question is it true that banks will not or are not lending out now? That doesn't seem to be in jive with what we're talking about, but would you care to comment on that? That the banks will not or are not lending now?
See, let Neri.
Sir Neri,
answer.
you want to?
No,
I guess you have to lend. I mean, because that's the business, right? I mean, it doesn't seem correct, but could you set us straight there?
it's not true. We continue to lend. Our the entire industry is seeing more lending so far this year compared to the same time last year. This is different from whether we are going to be aggressively lending more, given all of this new liquidity and the low interest rate environment. Because I think what will really help us become more confident lending to SMEs, MSMEs, is if there is some degree of assurance or guarantee on the part of field guarantee, which has already been worked on by our lawmakers. As mentioned by the governor earlier, there have been legislation in relation to this. So this should give us private financial institutions, together with recapitalization of both the Land Bank and DBP, more confidence to lend out to the public. But all banks have their own credit scoring process. And you cannot expect everybody to receive the same kind of treatment, because it will depend on whether the business will become viable in the future or not. And again, this goes through a very stringent process, which the national government would like the private sector to do rather than doing it themselves. Aside from the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of MSMEs that both the DBP and the Land Bank will probably have difficulty processing immediately. But we continue to lend, definitely.
Well, let me add to that. Banks is a business. They're not a charitable institution. They have to weigh the risk, right? That's why we reduce the interest rates. So we don't want the banks to park their money with us, with the bancos. We want them to lend money, right? And so I think it's just a transition, right? They are lending, and I think it will accelerate. The lending to business will accelerate as we open up the economy.
And Governor, what is your pulse on the banking sector? I mean, of course, all industries have been affected, but how is it faring amid this crisis? The banking sector as a whole.
The banking industry before the crisis and even now is in good shape. They are well capitalized. The quality of their lending is high. In fact, their NPL before the crisis was only around 2%. The non-performing loans are only around 2%, and we have prepared them well, and so they have lots of buffers. We have prepared for the rainy days, and so that they're not. So I'm very sure that the banking industry is in a good shape compared to other crises in the past.
We've learned our lesson. I think you said before that we've learned our lesson from the past crises that we've faced. If I may move on to another industry, the education. You mentioned the impact on the education sector as well, and I just want to get your thoughts. So, how much does it worry you about the impact on education? Of course, the school opening has been delayed now to August. There are some proposals, I think, from Congress to delay that even later. Does it worry you that we may be missing opportunity in developing that so-called democratic sweet spot as part of maybe the long-term impact of this situation that we're facing?
Are you asking me?
Yes, sir. Yes, Governor.
All right. I think we can, as I said, we can have gradual opening. At this point, looking ahead, I would open all the maybe nursing schools and medical schools, those that are involved in IC, telecom or technology, like engineering, maybe. Those will help us, and that's where we are very strong. Now, on the kids, I would try to maybe come up with a mixed system. For example, let them, for example, report for one day in school, pick up their worksheet and their assignments, and then go home. And then every month, do this every week. You don't no in-class arrangements.
No in-class session.
Pick up their assignments in printed form, then go home, do their homework, and every month they will come back to school, take exam, right? On a staggered basis, based on their family name, maybe A to D for day one, they take the exam. E to G, second day, take the exam. I think that we can do that. We can do that. In the meantime, that there is no vaccine, but let's not totally close the schooling of kids.
Right.
Well, that's my thought as an educator.
Thank you, Governor. Another question here from one of our viewers, from Gila Espinosa. This one is for Mr. Neri. You mentioned manufacturing being a bright spot in the recovery. In your opinion, how can we further support manufacturing to get back on its feet?
Dali lang yun.
Sabi ni ko, madali lang. Manufacturing, unlike sa services, which are where you cannot avoid contact, you can reconfigure factories to allow some degree of distancing. So again, we need to repurpose and redesign the way we do things so that it becomes more compatible with this kind of an environment. There is also this, it's more of a structural initiative, just like the governor mentioned earlier. Maybe we can take a look at manufacturing some of these PPEs, some of these, maybe even the ventilators, no? And target them to export them later on in the future, because so that our, whatever funds we allocate for those types of activities will also bear fruit in the medium term and not just address these near-term concerns about health. So, and of course, all of those structural reforms we support that will make our competitiveness improve further. Of course, part of that is infrastructure, very crucial, and agriculture, which is a big portion of manufacturing. Food manufacturing is actually quite a significant contributor to overall manufacturing. Now is, I think, the time to really help our agricultural sector so that they can transform into processing plants and even help secure our food supply should we encounter a similar pandemic in the future.
Okay, thank you. Ben, you want to ask something?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. A question for Governor. Do you have any plans to do any more of the bond buying arrangement that you worked out at the beginning of the crisis, which is was it 300 billion worth of government securities that you got into? Is any more of that type of quantitative easing in the works? A lot of people have commented to me, and I've seen a lot of comments online. They are the amount of lending that the government has gotten into, the amount of borrowing is rather high, and it sounds scary to people. So I was wondering if you have any more plans to do anything like you did with that original short-term securities deal.
Oh, that's, you're referring to the our repo arrangement with the Bureau of Treasury, where we lent 300 billion pesos.
Mm-hmm.
That's approximately $6 billion, right? The law says we can lend them a maximum of 540 billion pesos. That's what the law says. But they just asked for, that's what they just asked for, 300 billion.
Okay.
They have recently asked for an extended payment, so another 3 months. So as far as I'm concerned, there's no additional request other than the 300 billion pesos. So we're not doing anything higher than that at the moment, as long as that's what I get from the national government. But as I said, we started when the pandemic hit us, we are in a very good position. The national government has a debt to GDP ratio of approximately less than 40%. That's pretty good for an emerging economy. As you know, in US and Japan, they have more than 100% of their GDP. And other countries have about 90, 100%. So that level is very good. And given the borrowings that they are doing right now, we are getting a lot of offer from ADB, World Bank, and AIIB. Even if we borrow all this money to finance the current spending, we're only going to hit 50% of GDP, the debt to GDP ratio. So we're in pretty good shape.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ben.
I just kind of, if I could talk you into putting your profit hat on, if now historically pandemics tend to run longer than 6 months, maybe 18 months or 2 years. Till this thing runs its course. How long do you think that the country could, are we good for a couple of years? If this goes on for 2 or 3 years before there's a vaccine and before it really starts to go away, do you think the country can handle it?
I don't want to speculate at this time. I think we can, given our debt to GDP ratio and the confidence of the world economy on how we can manage to pay our debt. As I said, we just got an upgrade in a sea of downgrades, right? So there's a lot of confidence in the Philippine economy.
Okay. There's a question here from Claire Del Rosario Bernabe. Your thoughts on government support for tourism recovery, which affects employment for many also. I guess she's asking about your thoughts about the prospects of recovery for the tourism industry.
Well, in this, the recovery will be uneven. Let's put it that way. And so some sectors will probably take quite some time. Maybe some won't even recover. So it is now time for those in that industry to reinvent themselves. In the meantime, I know that some hotel owners, they just close the hotel because it's more difficult financially to continue to employ people who are not doing anything. So at this time you have to think, have vision. What's going to happen, say 2 years or 3 years from now, and act accordingly. Okay.
Right. Sir, another question here from Jason Flores. If forced to give a duration, how long do you think the bank buffers that were established pre-COVID could last given the current situation?
Again, I don't want to speculate. It will depend one part to another, but that's why we need this act from Congress where we create an asset management corporation where maybe for some banks who will be facing this problem, they can maybe transfer the money or the liabilities to that corporation, and with government help, also in the case of MSMEs, it's a combination of things we can do. But we'll not know this for sure until maybe a few months from now, once we open the economy.
Sir, going back to your old role at DBM, I mean, are you happy with the government fiscal measures now to address the crisis? Secretary Dominguez was, I think, lamenting the fact that there's no revenue coming in. But I noticed you were quite optimistic a while ago on maybe stimulating the manufacturing industry. Your thoughts, sir?
I don't want to comment on how my former department is behaving, but the
government, sir.
We cooperate closely with the national government, and they have done what they can do within the resources available. And that's why I think they are right now in a meeting with them to maybe push some measures in a special session. Because to me, if we want to have a strong recovery, every day counts. Okay, every day counts. So let's maybe we'll hear from them soon. That's right.
Sir, there's a question here from Arvin Jan Villaruel. This is for Governor Jokno. What can the government do to help create a catalyst for foreign investors to come back in our financial market?
Well, the foreign direct investment has shrunk globally. And so I think what we can do right now is to pass more measures that will strengthen the Philippine economy even more. We have to make it even more competitive. And there are such measures that I mentioned earlier, like the retail, the business, on the business side, ease of doing business, etc. As I said, there's a lot of confidence in the Philippine economy, but we shouldn't rest on that reputation. I think we can do much better.
All right. Mr. Neri, the governor mentioned earlier about the digital payments, digital processes. I mean, how is the banking experience changing? I mean, and what are some of the permanent changes that we can expect because of this outbreak, pandemic?
Well, the pandemic has pushed us to accelerate our use of the digital space. And again, this is what we thank the Bangko Sentral for, the work of Governor Jokno, the work of the past governors, accelerating the laws that will make digital a very important alternative for not only for small businesses, but even households. They're able to find some way of compensating for the opportunities that they lost resulting from the pandemic. Again, we have to enable the economy. You mentioned something about education earlier. Government can maybe subsidize some of these subscriptions to the telecommunications companies, but while it is true that other countries have more comprehensive ICTs, it's also an issue of affordability in the Philippines. Even if we lower the price of telecommunication services, many children cannot afford the new way of learning things. And unless there is subsidy or some kind of support that will give access to ICT, both the private educational institutions and the students themselves can actually benefit from this.
Thank you. We're running out of time, and I think the governor has another meeting at 3 o'clock, but we have maybe time for one more question. And after that, I'd like to get some final words or thoughts from Mr. Neri and from Governor Jokno. Ben, your question.
Yeah, I'm getting some comments here. The agriculture industry is also a big part of the recovery. How is the program to boost agricultural lending going? I know that was something that you had been working on prior to the pandemic, getting more lending going out to the farmers. Do you have anything in the works to kind of accelerate that, get people back to work and get the food supply chain moving a little faster than it has been?
Well, we have a program solely dedicated for the MSMEs, so that any new lending to the micro, small, and medium enterprises will count as part of the reserve requirement, as compliant to the reserve requirement. So we have such programs because we recognize that MSMEs account for about 75% of or close to 75% of total employment. So that's also one way of creating jobs. And it's cheaper to create an agriculture-related job than, say, an industrial job. So it makes a sense that we should help MSMEs.
Thank you. We'd love to ask some more questions, but our time is limited. Maybe we'll just ask for some final words or thoughts from, beginning with our reactor, then from the governor. Missionary, your final thoughts?
Well, again, thank you for inviting me today. I guess I'll just try and urge people to try to use the digital space and use e-commerce more. There are huge opportunities there for everyone. We're hoping, aside from being able to pay utilities and able to do small business in digital platforms, maybe we can even register our vehicles and be able to do some of the governor's suggestions earlier, so that it will be easier for people to avoid the virus, not having to line up for registration or a driver's license. And we are here, the private financial institutions are here to help you once that is made available. We're pretty confident Ed Francisco is here, and he will probably emphasize that point later on again, that we are here and available for you to be able to use our infrastructure. We had birth pains last year, but now we're actually quite strong in the digital area. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Governor. Your last words, and I must say that it gives me some confidence just seeing you so composed and so relaxed. So I mean that's I think speaks volumes as well. But sir, your final thoughts or words?
Thank you for having me. First of all, this war against the virus is in the nature of a public good. So I enjoin everybody to just do your civic duty and act responsibly. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Mr. Neri. Now it's time to move on to our next speaker, Mr. Francisco, who will be now introduced.
As the head of the investment banking group of Banco de Oro BDO Unibank, Mr. Eduardo Francisco serves as the president of BDO Capital and Investment Corporation, concurrently holding the post of chairman of both BDO Nomura Securities and Aviron Holdings Corporation. He is the current chairman of the International Association of Financial Executives Institutes, only the third Filipino to head the 51-year-old global organization, and sits on the board of several business, academic, alumni, and homeowners associations, such as the Development Center for Finance, CIBI Foundation, Finex Research and Foundation, International School of Manila, UP College of Business Alumni Association, Makati Sports Club, and Valle Verde Country Club. He is also a member of the Makati Business Club and the PLAT Bike King Triathlon team. He is on the Capital Markets Committee of the Bankers Association of the Philippines and Philippine Stock Exchange, as well as the Listings Committee of the Philippine Dealing and Exchange Corporation. He is the former co-chairman of the Capital Market Development Council of the Philippines and vice chairman of the Integrity Initiative, and has been the president of the Management Association of the Philippines, Financial Executives Institute of the Philippines Institute, Wharton Pen Club, Federation of Valle Verde Associations, First Valle Verde Association, and BDO Securities Corporation. He was previously on the boards of AFC Merchant Bank in Singapore, Shareholders Association of the Philippines, Institute of Corporate Directors, Foundation for Filipino Entrepreneurs, LGU Guarantee Corporation, Investment Houses Association of the Philippines, Makati Business Development Council, and BDO Strategic Corporation. Mr. Francisco has worked with other financial institutions in New York and Hong Kong. He holds a master's degree in business administration from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania and a bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of the Philippines. He is also a recipient of the Distinguished Alumnus Award of the UP College of Business Administration. He was recently honored by BizNews Asia as one of the Nation Builders and Asia Leaders Awards Mentor of the Year finalists. He also shares his knowledge and wisdom as a lecturer of the Ateneo de Manila University Graduate School of Business, and the University of the Philippines.
Welcome, Mr. Francisco.
Good afternoon, Dan.
Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you. Okay, I guess is it my turn, Dan?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I have my presentation. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Dante, and thank you, Blanca, for inviting me. I'm always very honored, especially after having, I guess, Governor Ben and June Neri, because June and I have, I guess, even if we're in competing organizations, we work very well together. I have a 12-slide presentation. I hope the audience will allow me to go through some of the slides quicker, because some of these are repeats anyway of what was discussed earlier. So if I go to the next slide, I guess this is the underlying theme anyway, what's happening today. It's always been health versus livelihood. And I'll just go to the next slide on that. No, I don't want to even, I guess, comment on what the IATF, because Governor Ben is part of that, but I think the government has done the best it's could with the limited resources or the limited testing. So we have the longest lockdown, but even if there's a second wave, I think we have to be careful. But at the same time, we have to go out. I echo what their two previous speakers said. Unless we start going out and get more comfortable and reopen the business, then the investment climate will deteriorate, and we will not be the investment grade institution that government and the corporates will not do well. Even if Governor Ben has brought the policy rates to the lowest ever, people will not borrow. And I guess my value add to you, Dante, or the rest of the audience, is that I'm on the practitioner side. June is the economist, and then Governor is the policy and regulator. But we're seeing what's happening in the ground. And while rates have gone down, people will not borrow if they're not comfortable, and people won't spend if they think that there's going to be the pandemic is going to be prolonged. So if you go to the next slide, I just wanted to show you this Ferris wheel of the next slide. Anyway, because this is the important circle, or it shows how interlinked everybody is. Despite rates going down, as what the governor has done, if the companies don't operate, they don't earn. If they don't earn, they cannot repay their loans. If they cannot repay their loans, the bank debts will go up, even if we're very well capitalized. And if our bank debts go up, our bad debts go up, our cost of funding increases, and we'll pass it on to the borrowers. And then it becomes a vicious circle. And then the country's debt levels will go up. It will go up past a phenomenal debt to GDP level. The government's ability to pay might be impaired. You might get downgraded. And then again, it becomes a vicious cycle. So I guess the key really is, it's not just the government. The private sector has to participate. We the people actually have to participate. If we don't spend, then it's actually also being doomed. There's a lot of liquidity, but people are not spending. So if you go to the next slide, this is more anecdotal evidence, but there's been over 80 billion already raised by various corporates, at least in terms of the investment theme. PLDT, ICTSI, and Jollibee were able to raise large amounts in the dollar market long term. Very good for them. Investor demand continues to be strong, so that's the key. Even if foreign direct investment has not been as high as mentioned by the governor, there have been some opportunities. So what's been publicly announced, KKR just did this tender offer for first gen. We helped them, and even if they bought it at a premium, it was very well subscribed. So it just shows you that there are select companies that are still very cheap, and that's the key. It's up to you to look for these opportunities, and we will help you. Of course, we'll recommend to you. Even Mary Mart's IPO did very well, and I think today it's at three times already the IPO price. If you go to the next slide, the next slide just shows you the PSE index. In today's other newspapers, I guess they talked about we being one of the worst performing. So I guess you will also, the listener, look at it as the opportunity. The Philippines is very cheap compared to our neighbors. So if you want to look for a potentially middle term investment, buy Philippine equities, because the upside is going to be very high. Because other countries, they have already sort of recovered. A lot of our blue chip companies are still down maybe 20-30% from they were. So that means if they just recover to where they were before, then you make 20-30% just to go back to where they were before. Next slide. Just to show you that in terms of investments, there are so many possible investments for you. Even from a 5,000 peso, 10,000 investment, you can go through the banks. BDO, in fact, we just raised 36 billion pesos last Friday. Other conglomerates continue to raise. We raised money for Ali. We raised money, raising money for Robinsons and Aboitiz. The large conglomerates are raising money. You can sleep well if you invest in these bonds. Then in the next slide, just to show you not just bonds, but even equity, these are the at least announced names. I just hid some of the names of the who don't want their names to be revealed yet. But you have many dollar issues, equity issues. You also have the REITs, Real Estate Investment Trust. At least you've heard of Ayala Land. They've announced it. Double Dragon has also announced it. SM and Robinsons, they said they'll be very interested. They're just watching what will happen. But there are many companies, including even Viva of Boss Vic, was very interested in doing an IPO. So there will be opportunities for us to invest. So the key really is if you're comfortable enough to use the money in your CASA or savings account to invest because you believe that the economy is going to restart. If you go to the next page, I just wanted to just give a little highlight because I was also asked to talk a little bit about the economic stimulus bills. Governor Ben referred to CREATE, which is really the earlier CITIRA bill. That while ARISE is a stimulus bill, ARISE is the 1.3 billion bill. And then the governor also talked about a bill that will allow governments to sell off some of their bad debts. That is called the FIST, Financial Intermediaries Bill. So I just wanted to mention it there. I have more details in my slides, but I don't have to go through all of them. But the key anyway is that CREATE is very important. I think we're hoping that the Congress and Senate pass this because this will make us more competitive. There was a question earlier. It will make us more competitive because corporate taxes will go down. It will give some net loss carryover. It will also protect some of the longer investors here, give them sunset provisions for their reduction in their incentives. But that will make us more attractive and compete more with our peers. And that's good. So that will bring in more long-term investors in the Philippines. ARISE also has many good provisions. This is related to the Joey Salceda and Stella Kimbo, what they've been talking about. At least me as a practitioner, what I just understand is that the DOF has some concerns because this ARISE bill costs around 1.3 trillion. So it's a little, it has a big impact on our finances. So I guess the DOF is just being a little careful, and I think it's fair. But one of the components of this ARISE bill is an investment corporation, National Equity Investment Corporation, which will help also convert bad debts, and government will get a stake in that. The BAP also is looking at some of the restructuring. They have some concerns, but I guess you can leave it to the business organizations to review and to try to opine, because at least the business organizations together with the foreign chambers, the local chambers, PCCI, we always work together. We come out with position papers, and at least we can echo and get some agreement. So that's the value add. And then I guess this last slide is important because we as the Filipinos, as the taxpayers, you could say that there's really a lot of money that the government can still spend. They have fiscal space. We're in a way luckiest that we have been in the last few decades because we have the highest rating so far. As mentioned, we've been upgraded by Japan. So while we have financial leeway, I think even before this ARISE 3 trillion is used, our debt to GDP will go up to 8 or 9%. So it's reaching the high side. So the question really is, what is the plan of the government? If they borrow money for this 1.3 trillion, it is true that many governments, or we can raise that money even from the local side to lend it to the government. But of course, we want the government to be able to use the money well and to be able to repay these debts. Otherwise, it will be a burden again to the next generation. So next slide. This one is just a highlight of the great bill. I won't even go to it because anyway, I'm sure that the organizers, Manila Times, will have some of these. I guess we'll share this information. I'll make it available. The next slide also just talks about the FIST bill, so that at least some of the audience will understand what it is in terms of providing support for the banks. Hopefully, this will not even be needed because this means that some banks have trouble with their non-performing loans and they'll have to sell it to a third party. That happened in the past. And then the second to the last slide is the ARISE bill. That's the 1.3 trillion. Anyway, so we will see. Of course, we're very concerned about MSMEs. We want them to get well. But I guess from their perspective, going back to what I said about, I guess, health and the economy, unless they're able to reopen, then they will not also be able to recover. So that's the challenge. I guess we want them to go out. We want people to go out to the malls. We want transportation. In fact, the last slide, I think even June Neri mentioned it, because what we're seeing is the malls are still relatively empty because unless there's public transportation, even if on Wednesday we go from what are it now, GCQ to MGCQ, but if there's no public transportation, people are not going to go to the malls. People aren't going to eat in the restaurants because even now under 30% sitting capacity, it's still empty because also people, I guess, are still a little concerned. Maybe they're just being conservative. Admittedly, if you want to invest, you invest in consumer staples. Governor Ben was joking about, yes, not investing in the high end maybe first, but then later that will come, right? But then on the other hand, there's a lot of good cheap equities. There are good bonds that you can invest in. The sweet spot today, the corporates are issuing a lot between 2 to 5 years. So you can get between 3 to 4% or even 5% maybe, hopefully. But because the government has brought the rates down, even investment rates are down, but these are very safe. And then I guess the economic managers have really done their best. So as long as there's us from the public sector, as there's speedy implementation and accountability, then they will be happy that they're being used. No? But the key really is 70% of the GDP comes from private consumption. So I guess even Ben had a good question. I think from the monetary board perspective, my personal view, they've done the best they can. So that's the monetary side. So it's really the fiscal side, and even June mentioned that. The fiscal side is really now taxes, what other stimulus programs are there. That's the one that will help businesses get back together. And I'm sure even Dante, when your different I guess reporters report, sometimes we have these I guess these are the teething problems of LGUs interpreting laws differently from the national. But once those are all fixed, and once we buy more Filipino goods, and once people go out, because admittedly people are afraid, and even without the vaccine yet, then that will improve and that will help in the recovery. I think at the start, when you did the introduction, you were asking what kind of a recovery we were looking at. We all hope it's going to be a V-shaped recovery, but a V-shaped means it recovers immediately. Here is one view. Some of the people like Ramon Nahang have been quoted, Ricky Rason have been quoted, like they just want to survive 2020. They're not even looking at making huge amounts of money for their shareholders. To survive is already a feat. For 2021, some corporates are not even trying to make significant gains. They just want to go back to 2019. The governor mentioned a GDP growth of around 8 to 9%, I think 9%. But with a 3% loss, that probably means you're really growing only back 6% last year on the average. So that's trying to get us back into where we were before. Relative to other countries, we're still very lucky. So let's take advantage of that. But I think my ending piece is that if the government is doing their piece, but we also in the private sector have to do that. I'm encouraging us to go out, but then we have to go out, but be safe. Wear your mask, unlike in America when they're not even recommending that. But here we spend, but we spend wisely, and that way because we see the liquidity. We're not seeing we're willing to lend, as June mentioned, but we're not seeing a lot of the loan growth yet. On the credit card side, we're seeing growth. Car loans, not yet so much. Housing loans, we're seeing some activity. But again, because the cars have not been out in the road, right? Because of the, but what we're seeing also, corporates have been borrowing. So overall, at least we're seeing activity, Dante, and I think people are just a little bit afraid. But once you give them more comfort, then I think the potential to open the faucet, and then the economy will recover faster. So with that, I end, and I thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Francisco. Always a very interesting and illuminating inputs from you. You are suki. Sir, if I may kick off the questions.
Yes.
The BDO has grown to be such an important bellwether for the economy, for the Philippine economy. And as you said, you guys are ready to do business. Banks are ready to loan, but somehow the confidence is not yet there. You expressed some confidence on the monetary policy side, but what else needs to be done? Do you think that will give consumers and investors that confidence to it's okay to spend, it's okay to invest now?
Right. Of course, aside from the numbers of the cases going down, maybe that's because sometimes we're also not clear, right? When we're personally, we see that numbers have gone up, but then the DOH is reporting some of them as old cases. For me, at least, what I'm seeing as comfort, because when I talk to let's say MVP, because the Metro Pacific hospitals, or when I talk to Eki Gonzalez or his people in Medical City, what's interesting, and it's not being reported, is that their capacity is more now. The number of really sick patients has gone down, apparently. So maybe if people understood that, maybe in fact your reporters can study that, because while the number of as a percentage of population might be increasing, but then the fact that there's more space now in these hospitals, but then so that means for me, that means that the virus is slowly being arrested, or at least we're understanding it more. So maybe we shouldn't be as afraid.
Right.
So that's good. And then with that, I think because I was also talking to John Lucoa, the famous John Lucoa, a French baker. He was telling me that he had a conversation, at least these are anecdotes, but I hope you don't mind. He had a conversation with fellow mall tenants, and they feel that they feel that the critical factor, if there are public transportation, because you only have the MRTs, but if you live in a village, you cannot ride a jeep or a tricycle to go to the bus stop, then that prevents you from going out. If they allow that, of course, with proper social distancing, then mall traffic will go up, and then some of the tenants will be encouraged also to open more. So that's what's happening. Naghihintayan. So but they're also very optimistic. They just think they need public transportation, and then the traffic and the restaurant sales, consumer sales will go up.
Right. Does it worry you what's going on outside of the Philippines and how this might impact us? I mean, I mentioned to Governor Jokno earlier that in the U.S. we're seeing resurgence of cases. I think in Arizona, 10,000 in a day, followed by another 10,000. I mean, they're probably looking at least closing some forms of businesses, restaurants and bars. And of course, we're seeing China seeing some cases again in Beijing. I mean, how much does that worry you? Not so much the number of cases in the Philippines, but maybe the impact of what's going on outside the country on the Philippine economy.
Yeah. No, I agree. It does worry us, because that means, that it probably also means, right, that they open up too soon. In our case, it's the reverse. People were saying that we should have opened up sooner. So it will also this information about what's happening in the U.S. specifically will tell you that maybe in a way that our government was just doing the right thing. But then also, what does it mean? I hope I still encourage them to open up more. But you're right. Let's still not do 100% seating capacity. Let's probably not yet open, the Coachellas or the big music festivals, because there won't be social distancing. But measured approaches with opening the restaurants and dining and all other, and allowing people to go to work, I think is worth it anyway, and we need it, and then that will give us confidence.
Ben, you want to ask something?
Well, if I may, just kind of bounce off of that last point just there. it's not just the rest of the world we're seeing it. Now we're seeing a serious situation in Cebu. And so I think we have to face the possibility that there may be, for some period of time, there may be these maybe not the whole country, but there may be these, I suppose a considerable chunk of the country, that is basically shut down now. One thing as a banker, you're doing it as a for-profit business. I think everybody understands that. But at what point does stimulus and from your side, lending, this situation has changed the marketplace for a lot of businesses, and I think a lot of people's jobs and a lot of businesses are finding maybe they are not quite the right business, not what the country needs, or not going to be relevant for too long to wait. So how do you at what point do you cut off the stimulus and say, okay, look, we can't keep you afloat because it's just not worth it. How do you put that across to people, nicely? Because, you're going to have to do it from your side as a lender, and the government's going to have to do it from their side as just, giving the fiscal support. How do you cut it off? That's one other question I had, and something else you said that caught my attention is you said a lot of the corporates are in more or less in hold mode or in survival mode, But on the other hand, you're seeing some corporate borrowing activity. So are there a lot of companies that are just borrowing just to keep themselves afloat? Or are they borrowing, looking a little bit farther down the road? Okay, in 6-8 months, maybe a year, we can get back to, making some capex and expanding again. How's it working?
Okay, thanks, Ben. Those are great questions. I wrote some of them. I hope I wrote them down and caught them. First question is the lending selectively. How do we say it? I guess in a way it's easier because we're a private bank and people expect us really to be truthful. Because I guess if I were DBP Land Bank, everybody's expecting to be lent money, especially if you're an MSME, right? With the stimulus. So ours, we have to protect our shareholders. But then as we've done in the past, we've always really looked at their ability to pay or their cash flow. Admittedly, the nice thing is that NPLs have gone up, so that's bad, right? But then we also have reviewed our portfolios, and even during the lockdown, frankly, BDO, there was no lockdown. We were all going to work because we're an essential industry, and we had to understand the cash flow drivers of these companies. If they have problems paying, especially only because it was closed, but once it reopens, right, then the business will run. That for us is a technical past due because it's just a matter of delayed payments, but they can survive. Right. But even Governor Ben mentioned it. If you're in an industry, maybe let's say airlines is something else, because airlines might be a different industry, and without government bailouts, they won't survive. That's different, and maybe some of the tourism they really are closed. But in general, that's why even if rates have gone down, how we try to explain to some of the clients, the borrowing rates have not necessarily gone down because the cost of intermediation or the cost of reserves we have to set aside. But then at least in BDO, we're still open because we still think they're good borrowers. And in fact, segueing into your question, yes, because I also had the brokerage firms and the research, I think 2/3 of the companies in the Philippines, the listed companies, have reduced capex, okay, which is conservative. I think even when I talk to some of the real estate companies, they're halting new projects to be safe because they just want to use up their own inventory first, in general. But if they reduce capex, and then there's another good question you had, then why are they borrowing? because some of them are already borrowing to fund their war chest. Because cash is king in a way, and liquidity having these lines is king. So whether they borrow from me through the bank or whether they borrow from me by raising a corporate bond, that gives them the war chest, because if they see something cheap, they can acquire it. A good example is we're very close also to the Mr. Ricky Rason in his group. So we weren't involved in this particular deal, but he just bought in 50% of Leandro Leviste's Solar Philippines. So that was disclosed.
Right.
So a lot of these other things are happening in the background. Even if foreign interest is not as high as it was, but among the locals, there's a lot of M&A activity happening. So because if they feel somebody needs help, but it can be recovered, or if there's just an additional equity needed, these large conglomerates, these family offices are ready to invest. So that's what's also keeping some of the borrowings afloat, because they see the potential for expanding. So that's a positive sign. That means they're not getting out of the Philippines and bring their money elsewhere.
Well,
All right.
thank you, Mr. Fred. There's a question here from one of our viewers. So by the way, our video has reached more than 71,200 people at the moment. The question for Mr. Francisco is, how concerned should businessmen be about the probable big drop in OFW remittances on consumer spending?
It's interesting because I was also in a Zoom the other night. We were asking about that. Maybe I should ask you. Because where I'm getting mixed signals, and I'm thinking through the answer. I hope you don't mind as I'm answering with you. I'm thinking because we thought because the government mentioned a large number of reduction in OFWs, but then if they're talking about, I forget the number, was it 3,000 or 200,000 reduction in losses in jobs, right? But if the 200,000 represents, let's say, less than 10%, or maybe 2% of the OFWs abroad, right? We're probably 20 million. So if it's 2,000, let's say it's only less than 10%. So that means that OFW remittances should not really go down, should go down significantly, and yet it's not. So that means that same as what happened before, even when people were losing their jobs, the Filipinos, and maybe that's very nice of us, we will save more, we'll send more money to our families abroad, locally, so that they have money for spending. So yes, I think as a total, it's not that big, but we'll have to check the numbers. And maybe that's why it's scary. Yeah, we hope we can find them jobs and relocate them. But in terms of total remittances, hopefully it will not be as big as impact. Only because of the love of family. That's
Well, I related to that, I asked Governor this question about the exchange rate. Do you feel that the peso is doing a little bit too well, and is it impacting consumer spending? I know he's always said that our currency is dictated, the value is dictated by market forces. But isn't there, you think, maybe an opportunity now, or maybe I suppose justification now for a little bit of intervention, just if we want to maybe kick up spending a little bit?
Okay. Well, no, let's see. Depends on which perspective you are. Okay. If you have extra pesos today, my advice is buy dollars because it's cheap. Because we expect the peso to depreciate. So if you buy dollars now, because if it goes to 51, 52 by year end, which is what we think, then you will have made money, right? But then you're right. If you are an OFW, you want the peso to depreciate, so you have more spending money. So that's the key. So that's the balance that Governor Ben has to say. But at least from the locals, we also recommend you to diversify your investments. You can still buy a PLDT or a Jollibee bond, dollars, or San Miguel, but at least you're supporting Philippine corporations, but you're hedging on the foreign exchange. So I think the peso will depreciate, not immediately. The reason it's so strong also now, because there's really no capex, as what Ben mentioned also or asked earlier. So there's not much activity for buying, and maybe because the most of the stores are closed, there's not much importation. But as the economy reopens, then there will be a demand for dollars because they're importing, and that will probably cause the peso dollar to weaken, where it should go anyway eventually.
Right. Right. Well, the theme today is, the opportunities. You mentioned that there may be some bargains in bonds and elsewhere in the debt market. You mentioned also that there are some cheap securities. Can you go back to that a little bit and maybe give us some tips, at least
Sure.
for those who have some cash to spend these days?
Okay. If you have liquidity, at least in general, on the bond side, if you buy for example, when we just issued the BDO last Friday, 36 billion, we priced it at 3.12%, I think, and the 3.12% was for 1.75 years. So later on, there's some talk, not confirmed, that the government might raise a retail treasury bond because there's some maturities. So if they issue, then again, that's another way to get yield, at least very safe. So I recommend that. And then, of course, more corporates will continue to go out. And then later on, when the REIT, the REIT of Ayala Land comes out, when I last talked to them, they were looking at pricing it between 4.5% to 5%. Again, good recurring income, so those are possible investments. And then also, if there's a portion that you wanna speculate a little bit more, or higher risk, higher return,
higher yield,
the higher yielding equities, I guess. The themes that we think are good now are telco, right? Because everybody's home, they're using more data. So Globe, of course, PLDT, and even Dito is already listed, so that's already a play on their stock. And then, of course, consumer staples, because the Century Pacifics, the Pure Golds, they've been open. People have been buying a lot of canned goods, so they're great. Properties were at least being a little bit more selective now because, as mentioned, their capex is down. But consumer staples, telco, and then the banks are also undervalued because we think they've been hit more. The prices have been hit higher than they should have been, or more than they should have been. They will rebound also eventually. So those are the three themes that are three industries that you should look at.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, I have a question. You pointed out that there have been a couple of big writs finally, and that's good to see. That's been a long time coming, so it's good to see some activity in that. But a couple of times within just the last week, we have heard word of the POGOs starting to, a lot of them are starting to consider pulling out. And this is one thing that has worried a lot of people for a long time, that particular bubble may someday break, and we may be starting to see the beginnings of that. I kind of hope not for other reasons, but are you concerned about that? And if that happens, if say a dozen or 20 of the big POGOs pull out, under the circumstances we have now, can the real estate sector fill that hole?
Okay. Again, trying to answer your question, it will affect several parties, right? Mm-hmm. From the real estate developers, because if that's already sold anyway, it's really the problem of their buyers, right? So that there'll be a glut. Real estate prices might go down because people will try to sell. From the developers, they'll just really wait. They'll just wait for these to be sold. But then from the REIT perspective, these are usually offices anyway and not POGOs. And the big developers already limited their exposure to POGOs intentionally because they were wary of that anyway. So they're more protected. I think the ones who get more hurt are the individuals who bought properties, let's say, in near POGO areas, and then suddenly if they're Chinese tenants suddenly leave. They might be the ones getting hit, and if they borrowed money against that, they might have a problem finding a new tenant or restructuring. So we're hopeful that it won't be that fast, so it won't be as painful for the investors.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Francisco. I think we'd love to have you the whole afternoon, but I understand that you have some other things to address as well. But maybe if we can ask you some final words, maybe some parting thoughts.
Yeah, thank you again for inviting me. I'm still very hopeful for the Philippines, and that's why I've been here. I believe in our economic managers, but I think this really is really a PPP, a public-private partnership. The government is doing their part, but we as the Filipinos, the consumers, we have to do our part. So we have to spend to get everything restarted. Otherwise, we're not going to get out of this problem together. So we're in it together. So we sink or swim together. But I think with our fortitude and our love for family, we'll get through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Francisco. Always very enlightening. Thank you. So with that, we'll move on to our next speaker, Mr. Paulo Azola, who will now be introduced.
Paulo is currently the Chief Operating Officer of Paymaya Philippines, the digital payments arm of Voyager Innovations. He graduated with a degree in International Relations at the London School of Economics. Prior to joining Paymaya, he was the Managing Director for Rocket Internet AG, where he was responsible for financial technology. He helped grow Rocket's influence in the alternative lending and mobile payments verticals, covering fundraising, idea generation, and acquisitions.
Welcome, Mr. Azola.
Hi, good afternoon.
Floor is yours.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. I'm going to share a presentation if that's okay.
That's fine, sir. Thank you.
Okay, I take it that you can all see the presentation. So first of all, thank you so much for having me this afternoon. I'm looking forward to giving you a few of the items that we've been doing over the last 4 months at Paymaya and how we see the world shaping up in what we like to call the new normal or the better normal in the company. Now, we've migrated into a world where earlier cashless was a nice to have. Today, cashless is really a necessity. We used to point to countries like Sweden where 90+% of transactions are cashless. And these were examples for us to follow. Now, far from a world where stores can only accept cash, which is the case in many cases here in the Philippines and other emerging markets, in Sweden, many stores accept only cashless. Now, this is not really the case here, but there is a catalyst now. If we can take this pandemic and turn it from the tragedy that it is, that it has been for so many people, into an opportunity to improve ourselves, as well as to improve the way that we interact, but also the way that we transact. This is one of the silver linings of this pandemic, and this will one day be described as a major milestone in the history of emerging markets and of this country specifically. So let's look at the three stakeholders of our economy. And you see them on the page, the icons at the bottom of this slide: the individual, the merchant or the business, and the government. And each stands to ultimately benefit from a world where cash is no longer king and where cashless is an absolute necessity. In fact, we have seen that occur in the real world over the last 3.5 months. From March 13th, when we're all living our work from office, spend cash, drive around freely life. Today, our life has changed a lot, and we've seen a strong and continuous growth across all of our businesses. So at Paymaya, we have three main pillars or three main businesses. The first one is our consumer wallet. The second one is our enterprise or merchant acquiring business. And the third one is our Smart Padala domestic remittance business. And across our total combined volume, we've seen a year-on-year growth. So from 2019 to 2020 of more than double in terms of volume and transactions. So very, very strong growth. And I think that the entire sector, not just in the Philippines, but in other countries, has also seen a strong growth in the same way. Now, on the consumer side, we've seen registrations grow extremely fast. The amount of registrations per month, the quality of those registrations, but also the amount of money being sent from one person to another, whether it's from a Paymaya user to another Paymaya user, whether it's from a Paymaya user to a bank account holder, whether it's from a bank account holder to a Paymaya user. We've seen that increased extremely heavily. And the same thing is true for airtime load top-up and other digital goods. So people in the Philippines are a vast majority on prepaid phones, and therefore on a regular basis, of course, they're buying airtime load for their phone. But they're also buying other prepaid goods like utilities, like entertainment, and like many other items. And that has grown extremely significantly. I'll talk about it a little more later. The other item that we've seen on the consumer side really skyrocket has been online purchases. So less people can go into a store and make a purchase, but that doesn't mean that people don't need to buy things. And so we've seen that migrate from the physical world in cash, we've seen that migrate into the online world in digital money or in e-money. And that includes also the ability for people to pay using their mobile phone number, which is something that ourselves and other digital payments players have introduced over the last few months. Now, on the enterprise side, we've seen businesses, whether it's small businesses or large businesses, whether they are primarily online or whether they are primarily face-to-face, all of them have seen a very strong increase in the ability to accept other forms of payments than cash. And not just the ability, but also the use of other forms of payments than cash. So that means that credit card payments, digital wallet payments, even foreign wallet payments have increased very significantly. And that's true of both what used to be in-store payments as well as in e-commerce payments. Now, I'd say there are two main phases that we have seen so far in terms of which merchants have really moved over from the cash-heavy world to the cash-less world. And that's in the first phase, from March 14th onwards for the next month. People really needed to go to grocery stores, to pharmaceuticals vendors like drugstores, and a few other sectors that were really seeing very, very heavy volumes throughout the initial part of our community quarantine. Now that in the second phase, which started probably towards the end of April, when e-commerce started coming back into play, when people were able to go out of their homes a little bit more, and of course that increase has continued in June, we've seen sectors like obviously QSRs, quick service restaurants, people needing to buy food for themselves, transport and logistics, people and packages going faster and faster around the country. E-commerce, of course, anything effectively that involves day-to-day purchases for people in need. Now, the third pillar of the population or of our digital or cashless economy really is, the first two were the consumer and the enterprise, it's government, of course. Now, government over the last year has undergone, and Governor Ben mentioned this in his presentation, has undergone a very concerted, very directed effort at trying to get people to be able to pay them, whether it's taxes, whether it's NBI clearances, whether it's anything at all that used to take a really long time for consumers, has been revolutionized, has been made cashless, and it has been made digital. And this is a very, very heavy effort from the government where several different national government agencies, GOCCs, government-owned corporations, have been able to start accepting payments from their constituents in a cashless way. Now, what we've seen during the community quarantine is obviously that the government had to accelerate the way that it went the other way. So from government to people. Why? Because it's very difficult for government to distribute cash on a very, very high scale way across the entire country with the current physical distancing requirements. And so Paymaya was one of the companies at the forefront, together with some of the banks, that helped disperse money for several of the local government units, for SSS, for example, for DSWD, and for some of the other NGO programs out there. And so far we've seen almost 1.5 billion pesos dispersed to 120,000 beneficiaries nationwide, and that is growing and continuing as we see the next phases of quarantine across the entire country. Now, in terms of domestic remittance has obviously been a lifeline, and it has been for several years. It has been a lifeline during this period for a lot of families who are in very, very severe need. And what we've seen is that Smart Padala has been able to keep the vast majority of its stores open throughout the entire community quarantine period. So these are, imagine, small businesses across the entire country that carry the Smart Padala by Paymaya brand, where people can go and either drop cash on the counter that gets sent to the other side of the country, or can buy airtime load or pay their bills. So for the communities, for the barangays, these are extremely important stores. And of course, as a store owner, you feel a responsibility to keep your store open, even during a time of need like this, or even during a time where it's very difficult to keep a physical store open. And we've seen during the entire community quarantine, the vast majority of our stores continue to be open. So the radical shift to cashless that we've seen over the community quarantine period, the first wave of it, we've seen that it's forced out of necessity. Now, what this means is that there was already beforehand a digital transformation that was underway even pre-lockdown, but it was in a much slower and in a less concerted way. Whether it was that some sectors were adopting it and others weren't, whether it was that some parts of the country were adopting it more heavily and others were not, it was quite a disjointed effort. Now what we've seen is that all segments, all sectors across the board have seen the first wave really come out of necessity during the pandemic. And that is out of necessity to avoid isolation. Now the second wave, which we define as policy-driven necessity, this is similar to the first wave, but it has a driving force and an influence from policy, from government. And I'll go through it in a couple of slides. The third wave really is where it isn't just out of necessity. It isn't just out of policy, but it is that people, we predict, will have a preference for cashless. If you get into a habit of doing something that is easier, potentially cheaper for you, and less time consuming, on a long-term basis, that creates a habit that I think across the entire country will have a snowball effect. Now, let's go through each one of these in a little more detail. So in terms of the first wave, the one that was forced out of necessity, this really was the rise of digital transactions, where previously sectors were extremely cash heavy. So grocery stores, pharmacies, even e-commerce. We've seen merchants that were very, very heavily reliant on cash on delivery reduce the amount of cash on delivery that they're doing and relying less on cash and more on digital payments, because it's a lot more difficult to actually collect cash from customers and then drop it into, if you're a logistics company, drop it into your own bank account, send it over to the e-commerce company who has to then send it to each of the sub-merchants below that. Of course, that creates a very, very cumbersome and potentially dangerous chain or loop of money. Now, that's why companies, some of the largest e-commerce companies in the country, even during the first phase of lockdown, completely shut down their cash on delivery. And now they've recontinued it, of course, to try and make sure that nobody is excluded from being able to buy on e-commerce. But we have still seen that the number of cash on delivery transactions has decreased compared to pre-lockdown. Now, the first wave also includes not just the large companies, the large merchants, but also the micro and small entrepreneurs who are expected or want to accept payments through e-wallets now, whereas in the past, it seemed almost like a hassle. Now, accepting transactions from companies like Paymaya, but also other types of wallets, is a necessity for small stores. Why? Because I now don't want to handle the cash, but at the same time, a lot of the people who are coming to transact in my store have received money into their wallet, whether it's from a family member, whether it's from someone else, directly into their wallet. And therefore, they have a higher proportion of people who go and pay with directly with their mobile phone. Now, the other part is it's not just the completely unbanked. It's also the banked and the underserved those who have a bank account, but it's perhaps a basic bank account or a basic checking account, who are forced to shift to cashless out of necessity. So I might have had a bank account. I didn't really want to use it for much more than what it is. I might just take cash out of an ATM. That was pre-lockdown. Now that has actually changed due to necessity once again. Now the second wave is what we call the policy-driven necessity. And that's a government push to utilize digital payments for transactions. What do I mean by that? Well, there are laws that are being written out that actually that are being proposed by some of our policymakers to help people make use of digital payments. And therefore, a lot of the rules that are being drafted right now are designed so that businesses and government are able to accept cashless payments. So merchants saying, I only accept cash, after a policy-driven wave of the nature that I'm talking about, could actually be a thing of the past. Now, the second big policy-driven portion is the rollout of the national ID that has been spoken about for quite some time, but is going to be in full play over the next few months and years. Now, the rollout of the national ID, not only will it be enable financial institutions to better identify people who are coming to ask for an account, and therefore speed up the process for someone who needs an account and needs to perhaps get credit. But at the same time, the linkage to that national ID of a financial account can have a very positive impact. Why? Because today, getting government funds to people entails a sign-up process. But if somebody already has a national ID that has financial capabilities, that no longer is a problem. So the rollout of the national ID tied to a financial account could be something very powerful in spurring financial inclusion for everyone. And in terms of the third wave, what we are really expecting, or what we, on the one hand, I really hope that it is going to be the case. On the other hand, I am absolutely certain that it will happen, is that cashless will be king. It's no longer a world of cash as king. The number of people across all segments of the population and all parts of the country that are adopting cashless is growing in a faster way than ever before. The breadth of services that are being used by those customers who are signing up is also growing like never before. So if I was previously only buying airtime for my phone, I am now also sending money to someone. I am now also buying online. And therefore, the value that I get out of a digital wallet or out of an online payment account is much broader and much higher than it used to be before. It's not just about the number of people, the breadth of the services that they use, but it's also the number of merchants that are including themselves into this wave, as well as the share of the merchant wallet that is not cash, but digital money. And I think in all of these efforts that we've been seeing, government has been a very, very strong driving force and something that we are very grateful for. So I'm going to stop there, and I hope there are a few questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Azola. Very interesting indeed. Ben, you want to take first dibs?
Yeah, we started off very near the beginning of this whole afternoon with Governor Jokno talking about the importance of ICT infrastructure, and obviously that is an issue that lands right in your lap. So what is your feeling on that? What needs to be done? What kind of obstacles are you running into? Because without connectivity, you're dead in the water, and so is everybody else trying to use your services. So what can you suggest to help push that along?
That's a great question, and it's a question that I think is on many people's minds. Mm-hmm. From my perspective, I'm looking at it not as a snapshot today, but as a progression. If I remember 6 years ago when I stepped onto this soil for the first time, it was a lot more difficult to engage in a phone conversation or in a video conversation at the time than it is today. Today, I can easily watch a YouTube video while I'm as a passenger in my car in EDSA. I can easily make a video call using LTE. At the time, it was much more difficult. And as I've been able to travel over the country through, of course, our business spans 92% of municipalities in the country, so I've been traveling quite a lot across the country. The breadth of that LTE coverage and the 3G coverage has actually increased quite a lot due to the CapEx spending of both PLDT and Globe. And of course, hopefully with the entry of a third player, that CapEx spending will continue to increase. So on the one hand, I'm more satisfied today than I was 5 or 6 years ago with where we are in terms of telecommunications. On the other hand, there's of course a big part of the population that still requires access to connectivity. Now, the way that we've seen it is, if connectivity comes, and if it comes for everyone across the entire country, we'll be great recipients of it. But we're not just holding our breath and looking at it that way. We've also decided that the people in the population who have access to a smartphone, who are connected, who have access to, who want to be able to make a financial transaction on a mobile phone and are comfortable doing that, these people will be able to use our application on their smartphone. But for those people who are not perhaps as fortunate, might not have a smartphone, might not have a connectivity, might not be comfortable making a financial transaction on their mobile phone, for those people, our network of 30,000 Smart Padala net stores or centers across the entire country, and as I mentioned earlier, it covers 92% of the municipalities in the country, that is their lifeline to be able to engage in financial transactions. So I can go to my local barangay store and have similar access to what a smartphone holder has on their mobile phone. And of course, we want everyone to be able to have the convenience and the speed of a mobile phone or a smartphone. But in the absence of it, we've created this fantastic network that enables people, everyone, to have the same level of access to financial services.
Okay. Mr. Zola, you're saying that the drive for these cashless services were initially driven by necessity, but eventually you see it as a preference. The government has this program called Balik Provincia, which encourages people to return to or relocate to their provinces. Is there a spillover benefit to companies like yours? I mean, is there maybe an opportunity to expand your penetration into rural markets in the Philippines?
I think from our perspective, we're able to serve customers wherever they are. So I think the bigger benefit for us will be that if the government program does enable a more uniform growth across the entire country, what will happen, therefore, is that economic growth is not just limited to the large financial centers, the large economic centers of Manila, Cebu, and Davao, right, but it is a lot more widespread, which means that 109 million Filipinos now have a much more uniform and let's say equal access to economic opportunities than they did in the past. They no longer have to migrate to a urban center in order to get a job.
They enjoy the service,
exactly. And so from our perspective, that's the benefit that I see, is really that financial inclusion will really have a lot more legs, because economic activity drives financial inclusion even in the provinces.
Now, the years before this pandemic, I think some of the concerns was in doing business online was security, and we in the Philippines, I'm not sure if you heard that what happened with the Bangladesh situation, and there was also, of course, reports that of state-sponsored efforts to crack financial systems, from countries like North Korea and others. Could you talk about maybe what progress has been made since then, just to give consumers more confidence in these types of digital transactions and payments?
So knock on wood, I think the first thing that I would say is that from a cybercrime perspective, we still haven't had a major breach here in the Philippines, which is something that, of course, we need to be even more attentive to. It doesn't mean that there hasn't been one and there won't be one. Mm-hmm. What I would say, however, is that the level of attention that trickles down from the BSP all the way down to institutions like Paymaya, like many of the banks in the country, really is at a very heightened alert level, especially at a time now when people rely more and more on mobile banking, on e-wallets, and so on. So that's something that that we are very aware of, and we know that the rest of the industry also has their radar very, very acutely, let's say, on.
Right. Right. Yeah. Go ahead, sir.
What I would say is that when it comes to some of the services that are being offered today were not offered in the past. So the points of compromise might not be at the institutions themselves. They might be at the employee level, which is what we've seen in some of the previous problems that we've had or issues that we've suffered as an industry at a banking level, but also at the consumer or customer level, where customer education on the fact that your financial account, your identity is extremely important. Your password, your OTPs should never be shared with anyone. That's something that, honestly, for people in a boardroom at a bank or at Paymaya might be very, very evident. But for the average person coming into the financial sector in a digital way for the first time, it's not that obvious. So our level of heightened, let's say, attention to cybercrime needs to be not just at our systems level, not just at our company level, but also at the individual level.
Yeah, you get that, Ben? So don't give your nephew your password to access your account.
Well, you've met my boy. He's pretty good at finding them, even if you don't tell him. One of the themes of our afternoon here has been opportunity, and you mentioned the difference between 5 or 6 years ago to now in terms of capabilities. Looking ahead a little bit, being a little bit of an optimist, what is Paymaya looking at doing in the future? What's next? Simply expand what you have now, or do you have some new new features and services and areas that you're planning on getting into?
So I think we have a lot on our plate as things are. I think there's all three of our pillars, and I've mentioned them earlier, but just to refresh everyone's memory, we compete in three different pillars. The first one is the consumer wallet. The second one is the enterprise or merchant acquiring business, where we help businesses to accept payments from customers, but also to remit money out to suppliers, employees, and so on. And the third one being our Smart Padala network. Now, across all three of these, innovation has always been, across the last 6 years since I've been here, the way that we've managed to stay at the top of each of these three pillars. The reality is that if we don't continue to innovate, we won't be able to compete against competition that is not just locally but internationally really starting to ramp up. So there will be new features. There will be maybe new segments that we target. But the reality is that these will be driven by a mass necessity rather than a niche target. Now, one of the examples that I make usually is, for me personally, I would love it if Paymaya had a way to trade high-yield bonds in South America. But the reality is that that's a niche product that myself and perhaps a handful of people on this call will be using, but the majority of Filipinos will not wake up at night thinking, when is Paymaya going to be launching this service? So the reality is that we are always having in mind the ability or the North Star of being able to serve as many people as possible with our platforms, whether it's through the consumer platform, the enterprise platform, or the Smart Padala platform. So there will be new things, but they will always be targeted to a mass portion of the population, whether it's on the consumer side or on the enterprise side.
I have a suggestion for you. How about expanding cashless fares for public transport? Something similar to what they have now with the beep card that works on the trains and some buses. You have how many jeepney drivers and tricycle drivers and buses running? The point was made earlier. We need to start opening up public transport. There you go. That's a mass necessity right there.
Of course, I think you hit the nail on the head, and it's something that we're all looking at and we're all making great strides to achieving. Let me give you just some examples. In the ride-hailing world, you saw two-wheelers like Encast and Joyride in the past be only cash. Now that's completely changed. Whether it's for their logistics services, the pabilis services that they're doing today, or whether it's at some point for their two-wheeler services for transport of people, once that resumes, that will be on a cashless basis. Now, when it comes to government efforts, they're very, very aware that transportation will only be revived and will only thrive with customers feeling safe in a taxi, on a bus, in a jeepney. And so the government is leading the way in trying to find various solutions from a cashless perspective to enable people to be able to pay for a taxi, a jeepney, or a bus using cashless methods. So you'll see a lot on that over the coming months. Over probably just the third quarter of this year, you'll already see great strides in the right direction on that front. The other piece that I would say is that Beep, of course, is a large chunk of, or a significant chunk of Beep is owned by one of our parent companies or some of our sister companies. And so we've been very heavily involved in the roadmap of Beep, together with the other part of it, which is from a different conglomerate. And with Beep specifically, we just launched a partnership last week where a Paymaya card holder or Paymaya account holder can load their own Beep account directly from their Paymaya wallet. So you don't have to go to a physical store to go and load your Beep wallet. You can load it directly over the air from your Paymaya. So there are going to be many more partnerships like that we're going to be rolling out over the third quarter. We're very excited about it. I think it's an absolute necessity. I heard in the previous presentation or previous Q&A from my colleague at PDO, where he was saying that the resumption of transportation, not just on the MRT, but also on the other forms of transport, is critical to the economy continuing or thriving again.
Interesting. Can you touch a little bit on the innovations that we might be seeing soon? I mean, I remember watching some reports about how some tech companies in the US and elsewhere were trying to, I guess, make signing in more secure by using biometrics and retinal scans and that sort of thing, as an alternative to remembering a password. I mean, is that still science fiction today, or are we going to be seeing that soon with Paymaya and from others in the Philippines?
Yes, so that's a great question. I think let's talk first about the authentication piece and the registration piece, which is where I think you were going, the direction that you were going.
Yes.
Now, from an authentication perspective today, you could sign up with a Paymaya account and use your Face ID or your Touch ID if your phone enables that. So that's already something that from a biometric perspective
that's real.
is already available. So that's true both for sign up and for some of the other transactional pieces. Now, when it comes to other pieces of technology that we will be using, I think the other one is really the ability for us to properly identify various different types of IDs. So the identifications are obviously, there are a lot of creative people out there who are trying to make sure that they can sign up with IDs that are not legitimate. And our systems have become better and better at identifying customers who are signing up with IDs that might not be legitimate. And of course, the advent of the national ID and the scaling of the national ID is something that is very important towards that. Now, when it comes to actual transaction, for us, we've tried to make it as simple as possible for a customer to pay for items that are small. But if it's a larger transaction, it needs to actually happen with a form of authentication. So if I'm going to, for example, a McDonald's and I'm trying to buy something with my Paymaya QR and it's 100 pesos, yes, I'm going to authenticate you when you log in, but I will not authenticate that specific transaction, because otherwise it makes the experience much more complicated. For a 100 peso transaction, it might not be worth it. But if I'm actually sending a 10,000 peso InstaPay Paymaya to BDO transaction, then at that point, that's a very significant amount of money. I need not just the authentication from my Face ID or my thumb, I also want to send an OTP to make sure that that customer there is actually the right customer. And of course, that's something that might make the experience 2 seconds slower, but it will have very, very significant benefits in terms of enabling the transaction to be legitimate rather than fraudulent. There are a lot of other innovations that we're looking at A lot of them actually pertain to the back end of things rather than the front end of things. We obviously want to make sure that we keep the experience of the user as simple as possible. So there are technologies perhaps that are being piloted in Silicon Valley or other parts of the world. We'll be looking to implement those as long as the experience of the customer is as simple as possible.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. Just an update. We've now exceeded 85,000 in reach, or I'm sorry, 87,000, and more than 5,400 engagements. We're running out of time, but Ben, you want to ask the last question since you asked the first one?
Sure. I just had one that just flew out of my head. Some of your back end things that you're talking about. I've been doing some work with some other people on these kind of things. Do you run into any obstacles here with the either the BSP or say the DICT, any regulatory problems with rolling out certain features, or even if there are features that are unseen by your customers? Do you have a good working relationship with the government organs that you have to work with here, or are there some things that could be improved?
So we are governed by the BSP, right? So we are a BSP financially supervised institution, or BSFI. My knowledge of other government institutions, agencies, is more superficial. It's more about providing support to them from a payments perspective. So I will talk mainly about BSP, not about the other ones. Okay. When it comes to BSP, our relationship with them has always been one of trying to make sure that if a new policy comes out, it's supportive of our long-term vision also. It's a symbiotic relationship. When we pioneered the ability to sign up using your mobile phone, to go through a KYC or Know Your Customer onboarding experience for individuals directly on the mobile phone, this was probably 5 years ago. When we pioneered this, the BSP was extremely supportive about this. And we were able to launch it in partnership with BSP precisely because of that. It's something it's the first time that it was done in the country. And of course, now it's helped a lot of other institutions adopt the same technology. The adoption of cloud technology, for example, so that we don't have to hold everything that we do on premise or on physical servers, is something that BSP has spearheaded over the last 3 or 4 years. What that has enabled is more, obviously, cheaper way for us to store and to run our platforms. But at the same time, it's enabled us to be much faster in processing transactions and in servicing our customers. That's something that we've done in a symbiotic relationship with BSP. I cannot recall a single item or request that I had for BSP that made sense, was technology enabled, and that they rejected. So I think the resounding answer is that they are very, very supportive of anything that makes sense, of course, that is secure, but at the same time that enables people across the country, businesses across the country, and government across the country to perform better. So I'm very, very happy with our relationship with them, and I know that the industry as a whole probably is too. One last point about that is I've worked in other countries in the past, and I did not see the same level of interaction between institutions or banks and non-banks and the regulator. So we're in a very unique position here, and we're in a very unique situation, and we can't wait to bring more fantastic services to customers.
I'm sure Governor Jokno would love to hear that. So.
I was going to say that you're lucky that you have the governor himself as a champion of the services that you're providing. So I hope that you guys can ride on that. Of course, to the benefit of all Filipinos. I mean, we'd like to talk to you perhaps offline later on, because there are things that are running through my mind about maybe some things that Manila Times and PayMaya can do. I mean, I'd love to have our newspapers paid through e-wallets, and would spare us a lot of work actually, and make things a lot easier. But I'll reserve those for an offline meeting later on. Thank you, Mr. Arzola. Maybe you'd care to give us maybe some final words or thoughts or a message?
Sure. Sure. I just told you how excited I am about the future, and what I'll tell you is that from a company perspective, what I've also seen is living and working in Metro Manila and seeing how fast we were able to, from one night being 100% work from office to the next day working 100% from home, and many other businesses also doing that. I think we've also solved a lot of the problems that people have with commuting, with traffic, and many other things. So I do see a silver lining in this pandemic. I see it, of course. I do see the tragic aspect of it. My parents, of course, are living in Italy, and so they were hit first by this.
Wow.
And there are many other parts of the world that are now hit much harder than Italy. But I do see that there's a silver lining. It's an opportunity for all of us to take it and to make something positive out of this pandemic. So I'm excited about the future.
Well, I hope your parents are safe and that you are staying safe as well. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Zola.
Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the final part of our program, which is the wrap-up or the closing remarks. Ben, would you like to do the honors?
Yes. I just from a purely personal perspective, my optimism level about what we're going through now and what we can expect to see in the near future has gone up a little bit. I think that the point that was made, particularly by Mr. Francisco from BDO and Governor Jokno also touched on it, is that the government and the banking sector and big industries are doing pretty well, or in a pretty good shape, and they're doing what they can to make a comfortable situation for everybody, and the public to some extent needs to have a little courage to step out there and try to get back to normal life. Of course, that just depends on everybody's comfort level, whether you feel you can do that safely or not. But the country is not swimming in debt. The economy is bad right now, but that's to be expected, and it's not going to collapse. People have things well in hand, and there are opportunities. Unfortunately, some of them may be a little bit of scavenging opportunities because not everybody's surviving this, but an opportunity is an opportunity. So I would say that, I would hope that what we learned here today from Governor Jokno, from Mr. Francisco, and from Mr. Azola would give people a little bit of hope and, kind of give them a little courage to, try to get out of the house a little bit. Like you said, spend some money. If you have money to invest, look into some of these opportunities. This pandemic has been good for certain businesses and certain industries. I wish I had gotten some Mary marked IPO, but better luck next time. So that's it. I hope that I thank our speakers for their insights, and I hope that gave everybody a little bit of hope, because I think it's justified. What do you think?
Well, I think I agree with you. I mean, it gave me a sense of confidence to see the governor, as I said, so composed and so relaxed, given all of the things that are happening here and around the world. So he doesn't seem to be rattled. So that rubs off on you a little bit. But like you said, we have to now go out and do our part. And if I were going to add something, just wear your mask and keep your distance. So with that, thank you everyone for watching this episode of the Manila Times Business Forum. Until next time, this is Dante Ang. Thank you once again from all of us.
Thanks a lot.
When everyone is watching and judging your every move. The pressure feels so real. Is this the right way? But when you know yourself and love what you do, nothing can stop you. It's your life. Do your thing. Find your way. I'm finding mine with BDO.
Today, more than ever, technology has become an integral part of our daily lives. For BPI, it has allowed us to reach out to more Filipinos across the country and the world. It has given us the opportunity to nurture relationships, provide much-needed assistance, and make lives easier and more convenient for our customers, the community, and the country during the best and worst of times. BPI gives more than just control over finances. Our products and services give confidence, security, and peace of mind. Through innovation that transforms the way we work and inspires a better tomorrow for all, so that no matter where you are or whatever it is you need, BPI has the right solution for your banking needs. As we continue to look to the future, we see stronger bonds, enduring relationships, and lasting partnerships that further strengthen our commitment to build a better nation. BPI. Ready today, ready tomorrow.
Every day, when you log into BPI, you're connected to people in so many different ways. Because now it's not just about the money. You transfer joy to family, friends, and even strangers. You exchange gratitude, explore your passions with people who matter, share your load, or for moments worth saving. You fund your journey and go anywhere your life takes you. You go on to invest in yourself. Log into happiness, to drive, to barkada, to family, to life. Log in to BPI's next generation of digital banking.
Next generation.
Hi, I'm your digital banking assistant. How can I help you?
I see you happy. I see you proud and assured. I see you braving it out. I see you chasing your dreams. See yourself through with Critical Care 100. Enjoy a lifetime of protection from up to 100 critical illnesses with optional riders to help you go further.
SM, through the example of its founder, Henry C. Sr., recognizes that business growth and social development go hand in hand. SM focuses its social development initiatives and integrates its philanthropic thrusts with an eye towards United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, focusing on the following areas: education, medical assistance, community relief operations, sustainable agriculture, micro, small, medium enterprise promotion, social inclusion, disaster resilience, environmental responsibility. SM Foundation's Kabalikat sa Kabuhayan, or KSK, aims to empower farmers and community beneficiaries to enable them to learn modern farming techniques and help them become self-sufficient. In a multi-sectoral partnership, KSK has trained over 26,000 farmers through nearly 200 farmers' training sessions conducted in close to 3,000 barangays and over 800 municipalities and cities in the Philippines. The program provides a holistic curriculum approach, identifying target beneficiary groups and promoting social inclusion, particularly among women and senior citizens. Engaging trainees in a 12-week-long hands-on training on modern yet practical farming technologies to improve the quality and quantity of their crops. Providing participants with financial literacy and business plan sessions. Promoting values formation and capacity building through workshops. And establishing linkages to local community markets and exposure to SM markets. KSK brings hope in farming, providing food security and a source of income among farmers and its community beneficiaries. SM's social development programs aim to bring about meaningful change to the people and the communities served every day.
We are Entrego. We bring your product from you to there, whenever and wherever. With business and e-commerce growing fast, we at Entrego promise to bridge the digital divide. We always deliver. We are committed to provide fast, on time, safe, and reliable logistics services for our customers. We never stop. We are enabled by the latest technology that provides full operational visibility. Our fleet is equipped with GPS mobile devices. We move forward. We are everywhere. We are committed to expanding our network through widespread distribution centers across the Philippines. We promise to take your products from you to there, wherever there is.
We are ready to deliver.